folks. Okay, so Marianne Williamson first. May I call you, is it Marianne or Marianne, and can I call you by your first name?
Marianne.
Marianne. I have interviewed Secretary Castro from this stage. I've interviewed Mayor Pete in another space here at the 92nd Street Y. This is the first time that I have seen an entire room just levitate and give a huge applause and standing ovation. So,
well, I have some family here.
clearly. All right, you are running for president of the United States.
Yes.
You've never run for political office before.
Yes, I have. Actually, I ran for Congress.
That's right, but not for president before.
Really? Yeah.
Is this what you thought it would be, this campaign?
It's kind of like, you know that if you put your thumb in the socket, you will be shocked. But that's different than the experience of getting the electric shock. Uh-huh. You know, but you can't really know.
Right, right. What surprised you about running for president the most?
I don't know if I'm more surprised by how corrupt the system is or by how wonderful people are.
So take the first part first, the corrupt system. How has it manifested itself in your eyes?
Well, I'm a radical believer in democracy. I really have this romantic faith in the notion that the wisdom of the American people is to be the deciding factor here. And we have such gatekeepers. And these gatekeepers do many times more to dictate the process than to facilitate the process. And I think that's wrong. I think it gums up the machinery and it obstructs the process. It obstructs the radicalism of American democracy. This is not just the most important, and everybody says it's the most important election of our lifetime. We've been saying that ever since 2000. It's one of the most important elections in the history of the United States. Because if you think that the agenda of this president is wrong-minded, it is chilling to consider what a second term would be. And so people who do not wish to see him reelected have a lot to think about. Because on one hand, where do we want the country to go? And in a way that I don't think has ever been so distinct, we have a whole different thing of what would defeat him, what would beat him. And when I'm in the states, the primary states, you can see that people are really thinking this through. They need time. They're processing this. They're doing their due diligence as citizens, as voters. And I don't believe that anyone should be trying to shut down that process.
When you say shut down that process, are you specifically talking about the DNC rules about who can and can't be in debates?
You said it, Jonathan, not me.
Okay, so we're on the same wavelength here. But why shouldn't the Democratic National Committee set rules, especially with, 22, 23 candidates still in the race? Why shouldn't it set rules for who can and can't be on that stage? You know, the new NBC News Wall Street Journal poll that came out shows that you've dropped from 1% support to 0% support.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, why should you be on the debate stage?
Okay. Well, first of all, let's look at the bigger picture. The US Constitution does not mention political parties, and George Washington warned us against them. He said that it would cause factions of men who would put their faction before the good of the people. That's number one. Number two, this issue of, oh, there are too many, as though the voters are children. Somebody made some comment recently about how, what it's like with children. Children shouldn't be given too many choices. I think that's the point right there. The voters are being treated like children, and voters are not children. And number three, I'm sorry, not one voter has voted. This opaque process of the polling and the polling of people who have voted in Democratic primaries. I can't tell you how many people say, I'm interested in your candidacy. I've never even been in politics before. I'm interested in your candidacy. But remember, we have people, millions of people will be voting in this race, who literally, for the first time, millions of people will be voting who were not even born in the 20th century. So I'm sorry, I do not, there are two political universes. One political universe is the DNC, the polls, the money, the infrastructure, all of that. And then the other political universe, the one which compels me and which makes me proud to be an American, is the voters. And when I look at that universe, oh, she's down, she's up 2% here, she's down here. You know as well as I do, I was the most Googled person in 49 states after the second debate, which I find hilarious because the only one, wait a minute, this is what's really funny. Montana was the only one that I wasn't, and Montana's governor was on the stage. So clearly a lot of people in Montana said, who is he? Is he our governor? So clearly, and I know they find it hilarious. You'd think they'd know. So, you know, as well as I do, that's your world. There was a lot of energy right after that second debate. And then the slam started. And it was well strategized. All the talking points were the same. She's anti-medicine. She's anti-science. She's dangerous. She's crazy. She's grifter. And it affected the field. So I'm sorry. I'm not enrolled in the idea that those polls show the deeper story necessary.
I want to get to the anti-medicine stuff in a little bit, but I do want to come back to the second thing that you said, and that was, I think it was the goodness of the American people, of the two things that surprised you. Talk more about that.
Everywhere I go, I just find people wonderful. And I find people, not only the fact that airplanes and airports and everywhere I go, stay in there, and thank you for what you said about this, and please keep talking about that, and you stay in there, and you hang in there, and just the wonderfulness. But even beyond that, talking to voters, particularly in these early primary states, when you're talking in Iowa or in South Carolina, Nevada, New Hampshire, it's now true in California, but I don't get that every Californian is really integrated into their understanding what it means that California for the first time is, for all intents and purposes now, an early primary state because they can start. But they don't yet have en masse the look on their face that you see in these other states. In these other states, people come to listen to you. They clearly know they have the power. They are the deciders. They're very clear about that. And they are listening with great intent. And you know they're listening to all the candidates, as they should be, and they know that their decision will help determine the fate of this country. And they take it very seriously, and it feels like a privilege and an honor to be part of their process.
What's the number one issue you're hearing from people in any of the states? Is there one issue that you hear no matter where you go, whether it's Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina, California? Is there a common issue, or does it change depending on the state?
I'm having a conversation with people where I'm not trying to figure out what they want to hear. I'm not trying to figure out, to me, we have a politics of people pleasing. Everybody, well, what do they want to hear? What does this group want to hear? What does that group want to hear? That's not where I'm coming from. To me, a leader shouldn't be deciding what you want to hear. A leader should be saying what, to the best of our ability, we feel needs to be said. And I'm having the same conversation with the rich and with the poor, black, white, Latino, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, gay, straight. I'm having a deeper conversation about the state of our country and the state of our democracy. All I know is that I feel heard. Now, I don't know if they came into the room thinking, oh, I hope she has a deeper conversation about the moral alignment of the United States that has been completely thrown off whack by an amoral political economic system that has corrupted our government and produced immoral consequences.
That's called a sort of pitch for this book, which we'll get to in a minute.
Yeah, I don't know if they came in thinking that was the issue they cared about, but I certainly feel that my speaking to it, I feel deeply heard and that I'm deeply engaged with upon that conversation.
I asked that question because in 2016, when Secretary Clinton was running for president, one of the reasons why the opioid crisis became such a national topic was because she said she had heard in all of these states, particularly New Hampshire, about people being addicted to opioids, and she asked her team, find out what this is about. We need to come up with a plan. She was listening to people. So I'm wondering, are you hearing from people, not telling them what they want to hear, but are people proactively coming to you and saying, Marianne, you really need to do something
Well,
about
yes,
fill in
of
the blank.
course. If you're in Iowa, the farmers are talking to you about what big ag has done. And if you're in Iowa and you're hearing a lot about animal factory farming. If you're in New Hampshire, of course, you're hearing a lot about the opioid crisis. In South Carolina, there's a lot of engagement on the topic of reparations and race. At the same time, I find it just as profound, the deeper underlying conversation about the state of our country that I feel is of deep concern to people no matter where they live.
Okay, let's get into the knocks against you that have been out there about you being an anti-vaxxer, anti-medications, and particularly there are people in the LGBTQ community, particularly those who lived through the AIDS crisis, who have major problems with you and what you said to the community at the time, such as if you're super positive, meaning if you have a positive outlook, you can beat the disease. There are allegations that you told people with AIDS to stop taking their medications. Please address that.
Well, first of all, as a general view about medicine, I'm Jewish. I go to the doctor. There is not one thing I've ever said, and there is not one thing I've ever written that is anti-medicine or anti-science. There might even be people in this room, I don't know. I founded an organization here in New York City called the New York Center for Living, just as there was a Los Angeles Center for Living that was of service to people with AIDS. First of all, I want to say that at the time that those organizations started, there wasn't any medicine for AIDS. It took a long time. It took a long time. I'm not saying that Western medicine wasn't trying, because Western medicine was doing everything that it could. Once medicine was available, the idea that I ever told anyone, particularly anyone within the AIDS community, that you will not find one person, some people did live through that time. And those who did live through that time, who actually were at my groups, including here at New York, have gotten on the internet. You can see a video that's on Marianne 2020 of people who were there. It is one of the most, that's not even a mischaracterization. That one is a total and complete lie.
Let me have you address this one thing that I saw in this Slate article. Where it's written, one HIV positive man wrote on Facebook that Williamson had harmed people with AIDS by, quote, conning them into, quote, believing they deserve their biological condition and even their deaths because they weren't spiritually fit enough to visualize the AIDS virus away.
Nothing I ever said, nothing ever did. I'd like, actually, if they want to turn, this is in New York. New Yorkers knew me during that time. And if somebody would like to turn the lights on here, I think there are probably people in this room who know. That is, anybody can say anything. Mm-hmm. That is the most malicious and vicious. My sister died of breast cancer. If anybody had said that about her, I would have throttled them.
And to the person who was booing, I'm asking the question because there have been stories written and no reaction from Ms. Williamson, and this is her
there has been so
opportunity.
Over and over and over again. You are
Before, I'm not attacking. I'm asking a question.
Well, no, there has been so much reaction. There has been so much reaction. That's why I said the lights be turned on, because in the very lovely, very beautiful, I think Scott Friedman is his name, Phyllis Weiner. There are a couple of people who were here in that community in New York who are on that video, mm-hmm. talking about their actual experience. That's not someone who knows my work. That's not someone who was there. That's not someone who's read my books or heard my lectures. It's interesting when you're on tape, thousands of lectures. Those things. This just. When did I stop beating my husband or my child? It's just not even anything close to anything I've ever said or felt or believed.
Well, I'm glad to have given you the opportunity to answer these questions on a larger platform, because not everyone is paying attention like everyone here in the audience.
Thank you.
You have a proposal, if you were to become president of the United States, a Department of Peace.
Yes.
Have that right?
Could you?
What is it?
Yes.
What's it going to do?
Yes.
And I'll leave aside the how you're going to pay for it until after you answer.
Okay, so this is the deal. We have a $750 billion a year military budget. We have a $40 billion a year State Department budget. So State Department is mediation, development, and diplomacy. Within the State Department, we have a $17 billion budget for the USAID. That's long-term development and humanitarian assistance. In addition to that, within the $40 billion, we have less than $1 billion that goes to peace-building agencies. Then we have the separate independent United States Institute of Peace that's $138 million a year. Okay, now, you can't just take medicine. You also have to cultivate health. Because because sickness is the absence of health. Health isn't the absence of sickness. And similarly, war is the absence of peace. Peace is not the absence of war. You can't just keep preparing for war and hope, well, maybe one day we'll back up into peace. Even Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense under George Bush, said we must learn to wage peace. General Mattis, before he left the Defense Department, said if you're not going to fully fund the State Department, I will need to buy more ammunition. So what are the peace-building agencies? Because war, once again, is the absence of peace. So what are the peace-building agencies? There are 4 factors which, when present, statistically indicate that there will be a higher incidence of peace and a lower incidence of conflict. They won't shock anyone. Number 1, expanded economic opportunities for women. Number 2, expanded educational opportunities for children. Number 3, reduction of violence against women. And number 4, amelioration of unnecessary human suffering. We should see large groups of desperate people as a national security risk, because desperate people do desperate things. And desperate people, among other things, are more vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces. Now, the people who actually wage peace with these proactive peace-building measures around the world have as much sophisticated skill and expertise and courage in applying those things in various places around the world, by the way, as does our military. But when you see how they are, you see the power that they are given. They don't really have seats at the power of table, which they will have in my administration. They don't have the kind of funding. They don't have anything near the kind of equal partnership that I believe we should see between the military, because I look at the military, I have great respect for the military. My father fought in World War II. I think the American people, I'm sure, agree with me. The military should have every dollar they say they need for our legitimate security needs. What we're talking about here, and I find it very interesting that only 2 presidential candidates are even discussing this. What I'm talking about is the hundreds of billions of dollars above and beyond what the military says that they need, that's spent on our military, that has less to do, in fact, almost nothing to do with our national security agenda, except insofar as it increases short-term profits for military contractors. So I want the head of the USAID, the Department of Peace, I want these things coordinated. And I want, like I said, a robust and equal partnership. And that's just on the international side, because the Department of Peace would also have a domestic component as well.
So it sounds to me, just in the description that you've just articulated and also what's on your website, you want to do for peace what was done for the quote-unquote war on terror that resulted in the creation of the Department of Homeland Security.
In many cases, yes.
So you will pull from state, you'll pull from Homeland Security, you'll pull from the Department of Education, because you just said a moment ago this would also have domestic.
Military, actually,
from Department of Defense, but also Department of Justice.
Right. You start there. You start with who's already there.
By pulling the peace-related activities in these various departments and put them under one roof. And that person who would be running that department would be a cabinet-level position. But one thing I also found interesting is that that person would also be a member of the National Security Council.
They sure will. They will not be sitting over on the side of the room.
So that caught my attention. what would that person be doing on the National Security Council? Articulate that.
You know, President Obama was the last American president who was dealing with the consequences of the 20th century. The 20th century is over, and the imperatives of the 21st century are very different. I grew up at a time, for instance, where there was a Vietnam War. When we thought of the consequences of the Vietnam War at their worst, we were not thinking about the possibility of global annihilation. We're living in a world today where, as is being evidenced right now with the insane talk that this president is giving us about what's happening with Saudi Arabia and Iran, the imperatives of human survival. We're not even talking about whether there's a war here or a war there. We're talking about how much risk there is of things getting so out of hand that global catastrophe on a level that we have never even had to imagine in our lifetime is on the table. You better believe that as the American president, I will do everything possible to address preventative measures. You can't just take medicine. You have to try to prevent health. I want to do everything possible to make sure that in areas where we could have prevented conflict, through diplomacy, through humanitarian assistance, through peace games. We shouldn't just have war games, we should have peace games. We need to look at all of the various ways when you see this many desperate people over here or over there, and history has proven this over and over and over again, including with the rise of Hitler. Anytime you have large groups of desperate people, you have a petri dish out of which certain levels of social pathology and malfunction are almost inevitable. You better believe I want to hear from the people who know about that and can help me prevent this craziness before it happens.
So I want to, because this is very closely tied to your campaign and to everything you've been saying for, a couple decades now, maybe 3 decades now in your new book.
Some of the people are like, yeah, she's been going on and on and on. Many people know this. This is not new.
So this is your 15th book or 16th book?
Well, it depends on, do I call a children's book a book? Do I call a prayer book somewhere, 13, 14, 15.
15, a Politics of Love, a Handbook for a New American Revolution. You were just talking about peace games. The book talks a lot about a spiritual awakening. There are a lot of people who watched you on the debate stage, especially compared to the other 10 people on the stage, for whom they're looking at you and they're thinking, who is she and what is she talking about and why is she up here in the clouds talking about spiritual awakenings and politics of love and Department of Peace? How do you disabuse people of all she talks about is just goo-goo stuff, that it's not grounded in anything real?
If somebody, first of all, they're saying that because they know how grounded it is. Yes. And you know that. And some of your own counterparts and associates and colleagues said so. And if you look at my website, marianne2020.com, I have probably more policy positions than any of the candidates, or at least certainly as many. I'm not the caricature that has been painted for people by certain people for their own political purposes.
Well, I'm asking the question because this entire book, or at least the half that I read so far, and it's really.
I'm calling you tomorrow to ask if you finished.
Oh no, I'm totally gonna finish it. But the thing that I found fascinating is that you spend a lot of time making the case that not only that the system is broken from corruption point of view, economically, but also morally and spiritually, and you talk about it in ways that actually breaks through. And to put a finer point on it, a colleague of mine at the paper on the editorial board, he's definitely more conservative than I am. And I announced at the board meeting this morning that I was coming up here to interview you. And he came into my office and he said, you know what? This is gonna shock you. but I have a soft spot
Okay, we have
for
to
Marianne
discuss
Williamson.
This. We have to
wait, no,
discuss
but you got to hear what he said. Hear what he said. And I looked at him and I was like, what? And he said, it was what you said, I believe it was at the first debate, where everyone was going on about their plans for this and plans for that. And you said, if you think that your plans are going to defeat Donald Trump, you are sorely mistaken. Wildly paraphrasing here.
No, you have a pretty
And you said that the only way to beat him is through love. And this entire book is about how to do that. So for those who have not read this book, for those who might be watching live stream who are listening to you probably for the first time, why is love so paramount for the moment that we're in and for defeating Donald Trump?
Well, you brought up several things, all of which I'd like to address. First of all, let's take on this whole thing about how many conservatives say they have a soft spot for Marianne Williamson. Mm-hmm. You'd think Democrats would be like excited by that. You know, hello, I thought we wanted to win in 2020. If you look at the people who are very excited about Donald Trump or who were very excited about Donald Trump, they alone are not why he won, and they alone would not be enough to reelect him. But there are some people who are just excited about Donald Trump. Okay, they're going to vote for Donald Trump. Then there are the people who, no matter who the Democrat is, are going to vote for the Democrat. Don't even think about that. They're going to. The reason he won is because of all the millions of people who either didn't vote or who voted for third party. So we have to think in terms of not only the people who are going to vote for the Democrat no matter what. We have to think of all the people who didn't vote, giving them something exciting that they would actually feel inspired to vote for. We have to think in terms of the people who voted third party, that they feel that we're saying something they want to vote for. And we have to appeal to what I believe are millions of people who voted for him but are at least disturbed. And they are open. They are open. But if all we
by
him, by the man,
right.
by how he behaves, and they are open. But if all we do is attack him, we're shaming them, and that will not make them want to vote for us. When I read an article, an opinion piece in Bloomberg the other day, that because there's been a lot of commentary about the conservatives like me, and they said there are serious conservative thinkers who Williamson has enrolled in the concept of paying reparations for slavery because they respond to her moral arguments. I mean, I would think anybody interested in like winning the election would think this was a really good thing. Okay, that's number one. Mm-hmm. Number two, I can't remember exactly what were the other things.
Yeah, I don't know. I told a long story about one thing.
Sorry.
Yes, thank you.
See, you can take notes. I should have been taking.
About your book, The Politics of Love.
Oh, why is love so important?
Yes, that's
okay.
it. Thank you.
Okay. The only thing that can defeat outrageous lies is outrageous love. And let's talk about why that is.
Yeah, why is that?
I will tell you why it is. The Democrats have to get out of their state of...
Okay. Amber Alert.
Amber Alert is an example of what we can do that's good. There's something very touching about Amber Alerts. The whole country stops. Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Okay. The president has ushered in an era of political theater. We will not be going back. And the idea, I have deep concerns about whether or not a conventional political argument will be able to defeat him very easily. Mm-hmm. Conventional politics is like a very good actor somewhere down like at the New York Public Theater behind a podium reading of a very fine play. He is like a round sound Star Wars on huge screens
and
all
IMAX,
around.
Right.
That's right. So we have to rise to the level of his frequency. It's almost like homeopathy. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. That's me, baby. I'm sorry. I'm not. See, they get it. Okay. Audiences get it. So I'm not saying I'm the only person in the world who could do that. I'm saying I'm the only one running for president.
Okay, so let me, for the one and only time in my life. So if you're saying you're the one who can rise to his level, how do you respond to someone who is IMAX surround sound, the latest Star Wars movie, who also has no moral core
Okay.
or convictions and will do anything to win and to belittle and destroy you. So
That's
you're
my
standing
point.
on this. You're standing on the stage with him, and he's going, "Marianne Williamson, she's a kook. She's crazy. She said this. She said that. She's been telling people. She's been cheating people, lying." What do you say to that? You
Okay.
don't go to that kind of fight with love, do you?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. So this is the deal. So the president is, if you think of who he was in the last election, in this next election, he will be that on steroids.
That's why I'm asking this question.
In addition to that, he will have the power of incumbency. He will have the shamelessness that we already know, the narcissism that we already know, the power of governmental agencies that are apparently not above cooperating with him in ways they should not, and whatever help he will have from the Russians. Now, the idea that we're going to have a very qualified candidate, and that's going to fix it. We had the most qualified candidate last time. We lost. Okay? Well, but you know what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying.
You are
Now,
correct.
He is a phenomenon. He is not just a politician. He is a phenomenon. We need to counter that with a phenomenon of our own. The phenomenon we can counter him with is not any individual, but it is the power, the energy, the motivation, and the spirit, and the inspiration that comes from having a real, radically honest conversation about who we are and what we are doing as a country. Now, this is the deal. I'm not saying that my opponents are lying. They're not lying. But when you raise your hand in a court of law, you don't just take an oath to tell the truth. You take an oath to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. They're telling the truth. I'm telling the whole truth and nothing but the truth. You get real with the American people. You have, because if you go to a doctor, the doctor has to be honest with you. The doctor will not be able to heal you unless the doctor is honest with you. And then what I've seen over and over again in people is when the doctor is real, the doctor is honest, then people get really intelligent really fast in order to discuss healing options. But we have a conventional political system that doesn't want to upset people, doesn't want to be negative, so it doesn't get real, doesn't get true, doesn't get deeply honest. It infantilizes people. It doesn't respect the intelligence of the American people enough to talk about how bad things really are, because we have to talk about how bad things really are in order to be the sober, intelligent, noble people we need to be, in order to transform these things and get to what good, how wonderful things could be. So I'm having, and I feel so many of those millions of people who didn't vote, they didn't vote because they know they're not being told the real truth. They knew that the situation was rigged. They were right about that. So I'm having a conversation with people. Our whole country politically is like an alcoholic family where the kids know, I don't think mommy and daddy are saying everything. I think there's a lot of unspoken stuff here. I'm speaking, I'm not saying I'm saying things they don't know. It's just that I'm saying things that, see, for the most traditional politicians, there's a risk in really laying it down and telling the truth. For me, the only risk is not laying it down and telling the truth, because I have people out there who would go, oh, it's too bad about Marianne. She used to really lay it down. And that's about economics, about children, about war and peace, about race. We get real and watch how the American people will go, yes, somebody's saying it. Now let's get to work and fix it.
Okay, and so that sounds great when it comes to a politician or a leader talking to the people, to the American people. But you spend a lot of time in your book talking about conversations between people and how difficult it is to have what you call radically honest conversations with each other. And I found myself sort of struggling with, holding on to some love through some of the examples that you mentioned. There was the Easter brunch that you had with some fellow,
Carolina.
yes, in North Carolina, where everybody around the table had voted for Trump. And how do you have a conversation with people who voted for and continue to support someone who is implementing policies that are having real world impacts on real people, that make people angry, feel unsafe, uncomfortable? How do you have that radically honest conversation with someone who is in support of that?
Martin Luther King Jr. said, "You have very little morally persuasive power with people who can feel your underlying contempt." So my first job is to clear myself of my own judgment, my own spiritual and sense of intellectual superiority, that somehow I'm superior because I didn't vote for Trump. Because if I'm holding that thought, I will have no moral persuasive power. Remember what I said earlier, I believe there are millions of people who voted for him. I want to tell you about an evangelical minister who came up to me at an airport just 2 days ago in San Jose, California. He came up to me, he said, "Ms. Williamson," he introduced himself. He's an evangelical minister in a small town in Indiana. And he said, "I just want you to know there are many of us who are supporting you. You're the only one talking about poverty, Ms. Williamson, blah, blah, blah." And then he goes on and he said, he didn't come out and say, "I voted for Trump," but he clearly was saying he voted for Trump. He said, "We felt we had no choice," and all that many of them feel. And if I look at him and I'm judging him, you know, to shame someone for voting for someone is an act of emotional violence. They're not going to want to vote for me. So when my fellow candidates go on and on about how awful Donald Trump is, I don't know who they're talking to. I don't know who they're talking to. I don't feel the American people need me to tell them who Donald Trump is. I don't feel that anybody doesn't get who Donald Trump is. So I believe that those who are so excited about him are going to vote for him. Those who voted for him and we need to vote for us will not appreciate being attacked. And I think people want to hear what's an alternative vision for something beautiful that could be the America of the future.
What you're talking about, you're answering the question as a presidential candidate.
Yes.
I'm talking about for people sitting here who are not running for president, who come in, who encounter perhaps people who not just vote, I mean, people who went into the voting booth and voted for Donald Trump for president, I completely get it. I completely understand.
Okay.
Where I take issue is with people who say he's doing a great job. So how do you square when the person last night at dinner in Washington, Marianne, there was a woman seated next to me who said her mother really couldn't stand Donald Trump during the election. She didn't vote at all. But then she got a soft spot for him because of what he did in response to the kids in Syria being gassed by Assad. And now she's in full support of him. And I very calmly, actually naturally following what you say in this book, my heart was open. And I asked her, I said, "I don't mean to be argumentative. I just would like for you to, if you can, explain to me how your mother can rationalize having a soft spot for him because of what he did in response to the gassing of children in Syria and fully supports him when he's jailing babies on the border."
What'd she say?
And so, well, she didn't know, and we'll talk about it later. It was horrible. And so is it judgmental for me to look at someone who says that they are in support of President Trump right now, knowing that it is just morally reprehensible, just to use one example, that there are babies in jail in our name by the United States government? Is that judgmental?
Yes, it is judgmental. But I'm not
saying... Is that morally superior? Or is it just like,
there's a difference
it's wrong?
There's a difference between a discernment and a judgment. It is certainly the correct thing to simply passionately disagree with her. That's one thing. But when you ask me how do you handle it, the spiritual principle here is that the first work is always on ourselves. So for me, it would be a little prayer in my heart. Dear God, I feel so like this woman is dumb and I'm smart. I feel she's uneducated and I know things. I feel so superior to this woman right now, so please take this away from me, because any thoughts I have from that are not the truth, and therefore I will have no ability to have any morally persuasive power whatsoever. The work is always on ourselves. You have to find your own neutral spot. Now, Martin Luther King said, I'm just grateful God didn't say I have to like my enemy. He said I have to love my enemy. He didn't say I have to like them. And he was very clear about that. But this is what the principles of nonviolence are. This is why King went to India and studied the principles of nonviolence, brought them back to the struggle for civil rights in the 1960s. This is what nonviolence as a political tool is all about. It is about the purification of our own hearts, because Gandhi said that the end is inherent in the means. Angry people, and I've been saying this recently because, boy, I've seen it. A smug, self-righteous, intolerant left-winger is no less dangerous to the fabric of our emotional state than is a smug, self-righteous, intolerant right-winger. We have got to end the violence in our heart.
And just one more question before I go to these really good questions from the audience. In reading your book, I kept thinking, Marianne has given me a lot of work to do on myself.
That is the point of nonviolence.
But I kept thinking, what about the person on the other side? What about the Trump supporter? What about the far right people? What responsibility do they have to also have their hearts open, to also be open enough to hear the truth? It is not a lie to say that there are babies in jail on our border. And yet folks think that that's fine, think that that's okay.
I think that there are far more lovers than haters in this country and in this world. The problem is that racists and bigots and anti-Semites and homophobes and xenophobes and Islamophobes, the problem is not their number. The problem is that they are convicted. The problem is that they are politicized and they are dedicated to effectiveness. The problem is not them. We have far more in numbers. The issue is that we must display as much conviction and political passion and fervor and willingness behind our love as many are displaying behind their hate. When I see an Olympics level athlete, I'm always so impressed, not just by their physical acumen and prowess, but by their psychological and emotional discipline. Let's say you see a really great tennis player, and you see a really great tennis player drop a ball in a stupid move that they haven't made since they were 12 years old. They literally do not have the time to indulge a fraction of a second having a reaction. They've got to keep going. Do not think about that person. Jonathan, we have an election in 2020. We have to think about everybody who might listen to us. We don't have to convince everybody. We just have to win the election.
All right. In the 15 minutes or so that we have left, there are questions from the audience. There are no names on it, but if it's your question, just scream. How will you help build poor communities and inner cities?
Well, the term that is so often used today is intersectionality, and it's used accurately and appropriately. Everything connects to everybody, to everything. When you're talking about inner cities in the United States, although it is not entirely true, in many cases you are talking about racial issues, you are talking about racial prejudice, you are talking about the deep underbelly of American, how we function economically. And this is why my having a more serious conversation about the economy and how an amoral economic system has hijacked our government, it has corrupted our value system. This is exactly what I mean. It is not an anti-capitalist argument, nor do I mean it to be, to posit that a virulent strain of capitalism has been in play, and particularly because of the undue influence of corporate money on our political system, has hijacked the functioning of our government to the point where our government does more now to advocate for short-term profits for huge multinational corporate interests than to advocate for the health and well-being of the people of the United States. And those who cannot serve the system, who are deemed not particularly useful to a virulent form of capitalism which requires cheap labor in order to survive, they simply fall by the wayside. In the inner cities of the United States is where you see those millions of American children, for instance, many of whom are traumatized before preschool. Millions of American children who go to schools and classrooms where they don't even have enough adequate school supplies with which to teach a child to read. And if a child cannot learn to read by the age of 8, the chances of high school graduation are drastically decreased, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. That's where those children are living, because of the outrageous way that the United States bases the primary, the basis of our educational funding on property taxes. That's one of the first things. That's why I want a United States Department of Children and Youth. That's where those children live. We have children, millions of children in those neighborhoods, many of which are called America's domestic war zones, who are suffering through a form of PTSD that psychologists tell us is no less severe than the PTSD of a returning veteran from Afghanistan and Iraq. I want a massive realignment of investment in the direction of America's children, and I want every school in America to be a palace of learning and culture and the arts. I also want reparations for slavery. Part of my reparations for slavery is the difference between race-based policies and reparations is very significant, not only in terms of its moral authority, but in terms of huge amounts of cash on hand that is available for economic and educational renewal. So all of my policies relate very much to what you're describing in the inner cities of the United States. Also environmental justice, which is a huge issue in those neighborhoods.
And speaking of reparations, correct me if I'm wrong, on your website, you have a plan for 200 billion to 500 billion over 10 years.
20 years.
Over 20 years to go for in specific areas.
No. My plan is that it would be, the money would be dispersed over a period of 20 years to a Reparations Council. The Reparations Council would be made up of people who themselves are descended from American slaves, who come from a cross-section of American academics, people such as Sandy Darity, Professor Sandy Darity at Duke University, someone like Ta-Nehisi Coates, the kind of people who have been writing about this topic, doing scholarly research about it for decades. Okay, also leaders in culture, leaders in all kinds of things, and politics, et cetera. Okay, the stipulation on the part of the U.S. government would be that the money is to go for projects of economic and educational renewal. This is the deal. If I owe you money, I don't get to tell you how to spend it. So the idea of white America saying, yeah, we need race-based policies, but we're going to anti-housing discrimination here, anti-job discrimination there. It's a continuation of the same paternalism in my book. So the idea is, you say to you guys, hey, it's yours. Absolutely. So for instance, like when I'm sorry, go on.
Okay, so one more question, then I want to get to some more of these other questions. Yeah. But this Reparations Council, okay, just looking at my Twitter feed,
yes,
and people who talk about reparations, there are folks who are like, I want my check.
Well, I don't think.
No, give me the check. And so what you're saying, Marianne, is there ain't gonna be no check.
Well, it's going to be up to the people on the Reparations Council. I can't imagine that. But it's not going to be my decision. I think it's going to be huge investment in things like historical black colleges. It's going to be capital for small businesses. I love the whole idea. You know, one of the big issues that intersects a lot of these things is gentrification. So the old race-based policies, I was having a conversation with some black leaders the other day in the Carolinas, and I said, okay, it's the difference between you're worried about gentrification, and so you want some housing policies that would help with that. Okay, that's one way to go. That's race-based policies. And then there's reparations. So reparations is how I see it. You get together a group of seriously successful, and they exist here. There are black billionaires in this country. There's some very wealthy black people. You get together some seriously successful black real estate moguls. And they say, okay, we're going to spend $10 billion, and we're going to buy those blocks of Charlotte. That's power. See, that's power. So what I'm suggesting is power. There's a difference between justice and power. I want more than justice. Part of justice should be you get power. And that is what real wealth gives you.
There's a question here that I'm going to ask you. Just give a yes or no, because this is it's such a layup, but I want to ask it. Just yes or no. Do you believe we have a moral responsibility to fight the climate crisis?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, 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 yes.
And just because throughout your book, you keep coming back to climate, how we're destroying the planet. There's a question here. What qualities would you look for in a running mate? What criteria, skill set, balance would you want?
It would need to be somebody who really knew Washington. It should probably be a senator. It should not be a governor because I think
why. Yeah, go ahead.
for that reason, because I have not been a politician in Washington, and I think I would want someone who knew the workings of Congress.
So you've got Senator Klobuchar, Senator Sanders, Senator Warren, Senator Harris, Senator Booker, Senator Gillibrand was in the race. Any of those folks?
I think that there are many fine political experts that would be very good running mates. Some of them are those who are now running.
I should take
What'd
you
you
with
say?
Booker.
Huh?
Booker. A lot of Booker fans.
There'd a lot of be love talk. There'd be a lot of love talk.
Yeah, I mean, he's been talking about the need for love in the campaign of love. All right. What do you believe is your biggest challenge right now to getting to the next level, and how can you/we address it?
There was an article this morning, and if you've been on my Facebook page today, my Twitter today, there was an article by a woman that I do not know that I really appreciated about how I've been caricatured and smeared. And I really appreciated the article. And my hope is that more and more people will speak up. More and more people will recognize, what is this? This has been disproven. Why is this article continuing to say this? This is ridiculous. What evidence do they have? Because what that smear has done is put just enough doubt in just enough people's minds.
What lessons are you learning while running a campaign that will help you run the country?
That's really,
A lot of questions from over there.
that's a great question because, and I'm sure this is true of every candidate, it's very much a roller coaster ride. And it takes a lot of spiritual and emotional and psychological discipline. And I'm sure this is true of every candidate. They're going through the same stuff. And it is a job audition. And some days when it's really hard, I say to myself, you think this is hard? Think what it's going to be like to be president if you're president. So this is good practice. Toughen up. Get over yourself.
Well, on sort of related, this question is, what well-known leader, past or present, do you most seek to emulate and why? P.S. You rock.
Bobby Kennedy.
Oh, okay. That explains it all.
Well, his passion for justice was married so beautifully to his intellectual and political acumen. That is what I aspire to contain within myself.
Regardless of the 2020 outcome, what are you going to do to combat the youth's feeling of existential dread and mistrust in the government?
I hope people will feel, no matter what happens, that I have demonstrated that we can put a hole in that wall. And even if we can't run through it and get to the White House, we put a hole in the wall and we're all going to just keep running.
So clearly you have a lot of supporters. A lot of them are in this room.
Depth. What I have is depth. That's the thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you have depth of support. If you do not get the Democratic nomination for president, will you run as an independent or a third-party candidate?
No, not with Donald Trump president. With Donald Trump president, I would not do one thing to take even 10 votes away from the Democratic nominee in 2020. This is way too important. No, not.
And will you campaign for the Democratic nominee?
I will do whatever the nominee asks me to do, if that nominee asks me to do anything.
And I want to end on one fun question.
Yeah.
You're throwing a dinner party.
Yeah.
You'll be sitting at the head of the table,
Okay.
and you've got 4 seats to fill. Who are the 4 people you would love to have dinner with? Living or dead? Just like broaden it out.
Leonardo da Vinci, Abraham Lincoln, Jesus, and his mother.
And on that note, Marianne Williamson, author, activist, presidential candidate for the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination, and author of A Politics of Love. Thank you very much for being here at the 92nd Street Live.
Thank you. Thank you. So much. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.